Hi, this is Misha, and today I decided to torment myself by finally really getting into the topic of the Romanian WASR-10. Now, in the last year or two, this gun has kind of obtained a pretty good reputation, but it's been hit or miss. These guns in one form or another, under one name or another, out there, a lot of misinfo, a lot of rumors, a lot of speculations, and just a lot of stuff that's just flat out wrong, and a lot of stuff that's flat out right. So let's get into it. On the table to start off with, we have my classic Romanian SAR-1, one of the guns that I will pull out at any opportunity. This is a pretty early import from Romania, brought in during the assault weapons ban. Next, we have a GP WASR-10 63. This is actually the cameraman's rifle that I sold him, traded him several moons ago, about 10 years ago, I guess it was. This came in right after the sunset of the assault weapons ban in 2004. And finally, we have a current production GP WASR-10, made in 2016 and sold 2017. So we've kind of got the years running here. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about the WASR, and probably quite a bit I'll forget to say, but I'll do my best to hit the highlights on these. Before we get into what's known as the WASR, which started to come into the country in 2003, let's just look back at what came before. Now, we have a video on AK import history, but even in it I said there's a lot to the Romanian imports, and I didn't have time in that video to really go into them all. There were no guns that came in from Romania during what is known today as the pre-ban era. That would be prior to 1989. Also keep in mind, at that point the Iron Curtain hadn't completely fallen yet. It might have been getting holes in it, but it was not down. But after the fall of the curtain, we started to see Kalashnikovs coming over in the 90s. The problem is, in '89, George W. Bush Sr. signed an executive order prohibiting the importation of so-called assault rifles. So guns that came in after 1990 had to have thumbhole stocks. Basically, they couldn't have features. No bayonet lugs, no threaded muzzles, no thumbhole stocks. In this period, you'll see guns from Egypt, Hungary, Bulgaria, but still nothing from Romania. In 1994, President Bill Clinton signed into law the crime bill, which contained the assault weapons ban, the AWB. Now, granted, this was passed through Congress and then was signed by the president. It was not an executive order. What this did essentially was extend the Bush definition of an assault weapon to not just imports, but all guns in America. So after September of '94, guns could not have evil features. Also, magazines made after that date could only hold 10 cartridges. Still no Romanian guns at this point. So there were no Romanian guns before either of the major pieces of legislation. The first Romy guns came in 1997. And there were a myriad of importers. Intric, Interarms, Century, and I'm sure several others. I don't know if KBI did them. I really don't know the list of the importers. Apologies on that. It's kind of before I really got into AKs, and it's really irrelevant. But a myriad of people were importing them at the beginning. The very first guns to come in were made entirely over in Romania, in the town of Cugir, which we just usually call the Cugir Arsenal today because it's gone through several name changes, including Rat Mill and Romarm and so on and so forth. They were called the Romak, R-O-M-A-K 991, and they would have a thumbhole stock, and they would take a low-capacity 10-round magazine. There was also the Romak 992. The 991 was in 7.62 39, and the 992 was in 5.45 by 39. These guns, as I said, would be low cap, but this would quickly be changed to guns that could come in accepting high caps. You're going to see a lot of names. There is the Romac 1, Romac 2. You're going to see guns called the WUM, W-U-M-1, CUR, C-U-R. You're going to see a 5.45 version called the MK2. You're going to see just all kinds of names and designations, and several importers coming around 97, 98, basically trying to build guns coming over from Romania, build them and sell them and do all that here. They would quickly abandon the single stack, going to a version capable of taking high capacity magazines. And the way they got around the 94 assault weapons ban, they would sell the guns with a double stack low capacity, either 5 or 10 round, but then they would also sell them with surplus 30 round mags, which predated 94. Obviously there were a bunch of pre-94 mags over in Romania, so that wasn't a problem. Eventually things would start to settle down. A lot of the other importers would fall away. Oh, before we skip on, one thing I should mention, apologies. The early guns could either come in with what's known today as a square back receiver, or they could have a slant back, which is kind of PSL style. So the slant backs would have a thumbhole stock, but you couldn't just drop on a military stock without some modifications. And back then there were not a lot. Also, guns back then could either be made from all new serial matching parts, some surplus refurbished parts which were matching, or surplus refurbished parts which were non-matching. They were very inconsistent. Some guns would come in with muzzle threads but covered over with a welded on device. Many would come with the threads cut off or the barrel never even threaded. None would have bayonet lugs though, because that was clearly not allowed by either law. In 1999, this gun here came out, the SAR-1. The SAR-1. This was really the first unification of all the various Romanian imports and the predecessor, the immediate predecessor to the WASR. Century Arms would be the official importer. All the others would start to fade away. Cugir and Century would form a partnership which has lasted to this day. The SAR-1 is a lot like the earlier guns. It would come in with a thumbhole stock. It would have a square back receiver standard. It would have a dimpled magwell. It could take double stack mags. It would usually ship with one 10 round modern production so-called hunting mag, short mag. And it would come with a couple 1 to 2 surplus mags. The bayonet lug would be machined off. And the barrel would never be threaded, which was good. Now, this is my gun. I have had the barrel threaded. I was able to do that because this one was never threaded to begin with. It wasn't as if it had threads and they were shaved off overseas, which is what happened with most of your Mac 90s and Modis. So that was nice, but of course back during the assault weapons ban, it would have been illegal to thread this barrel. Interestingly, the front sight base already had the hole and everything for the spring-loaded detent, but yeah, these were a ban-compliant version. Once in the US, Century would pull off the thumbhole stock. They would put on a standard Romanian wood stock, typically a pretty nice quality. They would have a shellac finish, kind of an amber shellac. They would put on a pistol grip. They would drop in a US-made trigger group. In fact, the early trigger groups were pretty problematic. They were known to give what's called a trigger slap. Newer ones have eliminated that, but back in the late 90s, they were still getting used to making parts in the US. The SAR-1s would have traditional AKM bolt tan guards. This particular rifle, I put a set of Romy G furniture on. I do have the original set out there. It's actually a very attractive, very typical AKM wood furniture set. The SAR-1s were very typical AKMs, less features. The federal assault weapons ban allowed them to have a pistol grip and to feed from high capacity magazines if they were made before 94, but all other features, basically back then you could pick 2 features. So you could have had a bayonet lug on it or a threaded barrel, but you would have had to have given up either the pistol grip or the ability to feed from high-capacity magazines. These were very successful for what they were. They were reasonably priced, around $300, $350, back around 2000. They came with a modern sling. They were built from matching new production parts. We have a cold hammer forged chrome line barrel, properly made guns. Cugir had been producing a very exact copy of the Russian AKM, known as the PM63, since at least 1963. A few people have reported kits dated 62. Either way, by that point, they had been producing the guns for 40 years. They made good guns. The guns were not perfect. They had a Parkerized finish, which was known to have some scuffs and scratches at times, but it was fine. It was a military-grade finish. Occasionally, you get a little bit of canted front side or gas block, or maybe the shellac on the furniture wasn't perfect. But back then, people didn't really complain. They picked up AKs as an inexpensive gun. And frankly, most of us were just thrilled we could even buy something like this, because after the '94 assault weapons ban, we were afraid, oh, this would all go away. So, we thought, well, no bayonet lug, no threaded barrel, but yeah, at least the gun's still the same. I mean, it was cosmetic changes only. This does have the scope rail as standard. We have XY stamped receiver. It even has the stamp here where a third pin would go. Obviously, this is solid. It was semi-auto receiver only. Standard AK furniture is what it takes. Standard everything. This is a very standard AKM rifle. It would ship with a modern green nylon military sling, which is what Romania was putting in most of their export AIM guns at the time, and still, as far as I know, does today. It would come with the pellet cleaning kit for the buttstock as well. So not a lot of accessories, but a few. They would sell these in reasonably good numbers until about 2003. That's the year of transition, when we go from the SAR to the WASR series. Now, the first WASRs still came in during the federal assault weapons ban. The last SAR-1s are dated 2003. The first WASRs are dated 2003, so the transition happened that year. The only difference originally between the WASR and the SAR is the WASR came in without magwell dimples. Here. Here. And it came in taking single stack mags, kind of like the original Romac 991. You can see the smaller divot here where it was once a single stack. So Century would have to go in and machine this out to take high cap mags, which is a pretty easy proposition. The problem is, and especially in the beginning, they would go a little too heavy on the machining, so you're going to get some mag wobble side to side. Now that said, all AK guns have mag wobble. That's just part of the design. This has a factory double stack mag well, and it has some wobble too. Maybe not as much, but that's just part of the design. In fact, we've never had a gun, no matter at my store or the store I worked at before, that had feeding troubles due to a too loose mag well. We did have a couple that they did not machine out far enough that were too tight, and what would happen, you could squeeze the mag in, but the receiver would pinch the feed lips in and affect feeding. So actually a too tight mag well is much more detrimental to reliability, if not aesthetics, than a too loose. So the first WASRs, WASR-10s, would come in 2003, and they'd be sold 2004. They would still not have a threaded barrel, still no bayonet lug at that time, because we're during the assault weapons ban. Aside from that change on the receiver, same gun, same scope rail, same XY stampings. Now, as I said, the SAR-1s had nicely shellacked furniture. This would change over to a more oil finish laminate, which we'll look at a gun that has that in the next little section here. But they would go from a shellac to an oil finish, still with palm swells and all that. And then with the WASRs, they would start to go to more of an unfinished or lightly oil finished furniture set. And the palm swells would disappear. The reason was pretty simple. They were using handguards that had the foregrip and simply cutting it off. In fact, on some WASRs you can still see, including this one, the hump where the foregrip used to be. So for export, they started to machine off the foregrip and then sand it down. This is why WASRs lost their palm swells. The first WASRs were still built from new matching parts. And then after the sunset of the AWB in September of 2004, Century Arms introduced the GP WASR-10. Now the GP WASR-10 was the first post-ban, or ban-free as it was called at the time, version. They had those out by Christmas, a little before that year. The only change to the imported guns themselves, they still came in with single stack mag wells, thumbnail stocks as they do today, but they started to come in with a barrel threaded at Cugir 14 millimeter with a muzzle nut tack welded on, so it was permanently attached. Now the assault weapons ban was over, but the 1989 import ban was still in effect. But having a muzzle nut tack welded over the threads satisfied the customs officials, the ATF, that it did not have a removable muzzle device or threaded barrel because it was permanently covered up. So they started to import those with those. Once they had them in the US, they would break that tack weld. They would unscrew the muzzle nut, which is pretty much trashed after being welded, and then screw on a AKM style sugar scoop muzzle brake. They would also go, the bayonet lug had been machined off, they would go back and they would weld up the wings because the square is still here. So all they had to do was mill the wings back on. They would basically weld it and then mill it down to take a standard Romanian type bayonet. And so the GP WASR-10 would start to ship usually at that time with two 30-round mags. It no longer mattered if they were older, pre-94 or modern production, although most of them were still surplus because they had a bunch. They would start to ship more with the leather slings than the green. Still had the cleaning kit. They started to usually come with an oil bottle. Sometimes they would also come with a magazine pouch, which could range from 2-pocket to 3 to 4, depending on any Romanian they wanted. And of course they would start to usually ship with the bayonet because they wanted to show off the fact that now we can have a bayonet lug. The GP WASR-10 was a big hit in late 04 because Century was one of the first companies, along with Arsenal, to get ban-free guns to market. And they were very affordable. They were about $300. They were actually a little bit cheaper than the SAR had been. These were extremely successful, and at the same time Romania was sending over so-called Romy G kits, which were military guns that were demilled and sent over as kits. Now they would basically just cut the receiver here, send the entire front end with the barrel intact, buttstock, trunnion, all that, and people would build them. They were very cheap back then, under $100. So in Nodak Spud had been making receivers for a little time. People were building them. So you saw the WASRs and you saw the Romanian G kit builds, both very popular. Things were going really good until in 2005, the Treasury Department under George Bush Jr.'s administration declared that the barrel could no longer be imported. Prior to this, when importing a parts kit, the receiver was considered the machine gun, so obviously you couldn't import it, but you could bring in the barrels. After that, they declared basically the barrel as part of the machine gun, and if a barrel had ever been on a select fire weapon, it was no longer importable. So this is what we call today the barrel ban in 2005. Now interestingly, if someone already had an open import permit, they didn't cancel them. If you had a permit in 2005 when this rule came down to bring over, say, 2,000 kits, and you only had brought over 500, they would let you fulfill that import. So you could bring over the remaining 1,500, but from after that, you couldn't bring over more. So you'd still see kits with barrels appearing on the market for a couple of years afterwards, but the writing was on the wall. And Cugir had been demilling guns, sending them over as kits to us here, but they couldn't do that anymore because the barrel, that's a major part of the gun. So they started to get smart. This is when the GP WASR-10 63 began to appear around 2007. These guns, including this one here, which is GP WASR-10 63, were built from original military guns rebuilt in Romania on modern production semi-only receivers. Essentially, these are kit builds but done over in Romania by the Romanians. This is why you'll see trunnion dates. This one's 1972, I believe. You'll see trunnion dates anywhere from the early 60s through really most of them were early 80s. There were later ones too, but a lot of the guns at that time were still in service. But they were taking older guns, Romy Gs and military guns and all that. They were taking the military receiver off and putting it on a WASR-10 receiver. And this allowed them to get the barrels into the country on rifles. Obviously, it was much cheaper for them. They didn't have to produce new parts. Just a few, including the receiver. Everything else were just surplus. So they got around the barrel ban by basically doing the kit building over there instead of over here. These I really like. Now, to be fair, they're not always matching because military guns themselves that they were built from weren't always matching after being in military service for decades. Parts sometimes break or get swapped around. Some were matching, some were not. Some parts had some minor wear, which were, of course, they were refurbished. They were reblued, reparked. Now, the receivers were brand new, and the barrels were brand new, because remember, we have that machine gun barrel rule. So they did put new chrome-lined cold hammer forged barrels on these, just as they'd been doing with the WASR-10 and SAR-1 before. So we have a new barrel, which is good, but still military spec barrel. Some people have said that the barrels on a WASR aren't military spec. This is BS. They are. They're made at the same factory. It would actually cost them more money to make lower quality barrels than to just put their military barrels in. You'll have military dated trunnions. You'll usually have the military proof, which changed over time. It's a triangle. Sometimes it'll have an arrow in it, sometimes not. Cugir changed their markings over time. The furniture, as I said, was basically refurbished military furniture, so it's sanded down. And this is where one myth, I think, about the WASR can be talked about. There was a myth that was very prevalent around 2007, 2008, 2009, that the WASR was built from rejected military parts. This is very easy to refute with the 1063, because it was literally built with military parts from a military rifle. It had literally been accepted into service, passed all the specs, and, gone in. As for older WASRs, and the SAR-1s being built from rejected military parts, all I can say is no one ever provided a shred of evidence to support that claim. And thankfully, over the last 10 years, it's died out, finally. I'm sure once in a while, a part that maybe didn't quite make military might have been put on or something left over. Romania Cugir kind of does a 0, 1, 2, 3 system where parts are categorized by their size. So just because a part may not fit one rifle, it may be a 2, which is a little large, and it needs to go into it needs a 1, which is a little smaller. That doesn't mean it's a rejected part. It just means it wasn't fitting that rifle and was a leftover part. You see this a lot in manufacturing. I'm sure you guys know. There's a whole guide out there on what can fit and what can't fit. But they made things to original specs, which are a little loose on the AK. And so just because the specs weren't, like say you had a 1 marked trunnion and a 3 marked barrel, the barrel's large, but it would fit in a 2-march trunnion, but not a 1, so the barrel might have been out of spec for that trunnion, but not out of spec in general. But again, that was a rumor that came out. It has never been substantiated, especially by no one over at Cugir. It doesn't matter. The WASRs have proven themselves to be very durable and reliable. There are many people now that have put over 10,000 rounds through theirs without any issue. So that was definitely a rumor that made the circuit back then. Now, something that really did happen, remember again, the 1063s are built from military kits. Once in a while, even with the re-blue or re-park, an original part might have some wear, some old pitting. This is just a factor of getting a gun that's basically a kit gun. Canted sights and gas blocks had always been a minor issue, but usually, say 4 out of 5 times, if not even more, even if the front sight was canted, it could be adjusted, as this one is adjusted over a little bit to the left, to compensate and line up with the rear sight. This is within Russian and Romanian military spec. So even if this is a little off center, it doesn't matter as long as it can be adjusted to hit the point of aim. The WASR and the AK in general became much more popular after the 2008 presidential election, where Mr. Obama came into office. People had a panic buy. I wasn't here for the time. I was in Russia at that point, but I came back in 2009 and heard stories and had talked with friends via email about what was going on. So I didn't experience that one firsthand. I can't say I'm too misty-eyed over that. But people started to buy in large numbers, and Century was selling out of these as fast as they could import them. They did put a lot of pressure on Cugir to deliver rifles as quick as possible, and to some extent damn the QC. The lowest point for the WASR rifle would have been guns made late in 2008 and early 2009. These guns, while mostly functional, we had a few that really did come in the gun shop that had to be sent back, that were not workable. Most still were. But the highest rejection rate was then. You had a lot of canted stuff, some of them so canted they really weren't workable. You had a few bolts that would bind up. Generally speaking, they were still working guns, but this was a low point. And this is where a lot of the myth of the canted front sight and even canted gas blocks and loose mag wells and all that come from. That period really gave it. But to be fair, people were wanting the guns and were willing to pay and weren't being too picky. So it was a seller's market, and that is often the end result is lower quality. But as the presidential election faded into history and the market kind of calmed down, quality went back up again. Century saw how many returns they were getting. They told Cugir to kind of step it up. And so guns brought in late 2009, 2010 started to improve once more. Now, as time goes on, you see fewer and fewer of these kit guns. Guns built from military surplus type parts. This is a modern production, as I said, 2016 dated trunnion, 2017's when it came to the store. In the last few years, Cugir has gone back to using new production parts for the most part. I haven't seen a military dated trunnion in a little while. They really tightened up quality control. Front sight cant, gas block cant are almost not existent now because people complained the AK became so vastly popular that more and more people bought them, more people who were used to the AR-15 and other more precision rifles. So Century and Cugir were forced to really tighten things up. Even if they were just cosmetic, they still were forced to do it. So the newer guns are more cosmetically appealing because of the more broad market appeal of the WASR. One thing that Century has done, though, which is cosmetically appealing but not structurally good, they started using new production American wood on these versus the original sanded down surplus. The surplus wood may not look great right out of the box, but all it would take would be a little sanding and an oil or some shellac, and it really comes to life. It was good, high quality, military grade laminated wood. Century now is using American made hardwood with a semi-gloss finish, which looks attractive, and pretty much according to everyone, including AK Operators Union and whoever else has done extensive shooting of these, this wood is crap. It really is. It is like just picking up this rifle versus this rifle. There's a significant weight difference in the back here. Even the handguards feel lighter. So you can tell the wood is physically not as dense. It's more porous. It doesn't have a storage compartment for the cleaning kit. Just this rib butt plate. The screws in it are Phillips head instead of flathead as on a military gun. And that's usually what happens. The screws will basically waller out under recoil because it is a light wood. The wood screws can't get a good bite, and the channels just work out. Plus, the way that a stock fits in an AKM, it needs to fit in there tightly and stay tight. So anyone buying a modern WASR, and these woods started to appear a couple of years ago. So anyone who's bought a WASR in the last year or two, the guns themselves are probably prettier. They really are. These have always had brand new barrels, but again, surplus parts. The chance of cant is gone, pretty much. Serial matching parts. These are all going to be matching now. But one thing you do want to do is replace the furniture. This is not military grade wood. Good news is Romanian wood is cheap. Or you can get something else. It does take standard AKM wood, so anything will really fit for a stamped receiver. Speaking about what these come with, you notice this has a mag pull, P-mag in it. These no longer ship with 2 surplus steel mags. Instead, they ship with 1 mag pull Gen 1 P-mag. Because I'm sure Century got a good buy on them when the Gen 2s came out. And that's really about it. Once in a while, you'll still see a cleaning kit, a little pellet cleaning kit in the box. But gone are the days of mag pouches, bayonets, oil bottles. These still have a bayonet lug, still threaded barrel, all that. But all the goodies are gone. Instead, these older guns just came in what I really liked. It was a communist cardboard box. It was just looked like a military box, soaked in Cosmoline, had that smell, looked like what a WASR should come in. Now these come in a very colorful, glossy box with the foam inserts and padding. It's not a reusable box, don't worry, it's still cardboard, it's still disposable. But it's about double the size of what this gun needs. So Century basically abandoned all the accessories and instead tried to put it in a box that made it look more commercial, which is their decision. But the newer guns will come in like that. In addition, cost. As I said, the SARs were $350 to $400. Then the WASRs were anywhere from $300 to $400 for a long time. But over the last few years, these things have slowly crept up. $450, $500, $550. Now we're at a point where the cheapest you can find a WASR is $600, $650, with many going for $750. There was a time when even dealer cost earlier this year was $680. And during the potential election scare of 2016, dealer costs went over $700. So these guns have gone up. The fit and finish may be a little better, but they don't come with as many accessories. And this can't be a coincidence that Century also introduced their American-made AK line around the same time the price went up on these. They have the RAS-47 and the C-39 V2. Now, the whole import versus U.S., we have a video on that, so check that out for my comments there. But I'm just pointing out that the WASR went up in price at the same time as the U.S. AKs from Century started to come out. These do still have machined out single to double stack mag wells. Get this over here. But they've taken a little more care not to hog them out as much and reduce the chance of mag wobble. Let's see how this one fits in. I've never actually put a metal mag in this gun because it's new in the store. So we have some. Actually, I have quite a bit of front to back on this. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really like that, actually. But the side to side is a little less than the 1063. But keep in mind, now they are wanting these to ship and planning for people to use US polymer mags, which are known for being oversized. See, this fits much tighter. It still has some front to back, but no real side to side to speak of. And there are fewer burrs and fewer this and that, so they have upped their quality there. While today Century really only sells the basic WASR-10 with a fixed stock, sometimes a mag pull stock, but that's US, in 7.62x39, this wasn't always the case. In fact, at one time the product line was quite expansive and very interesting. There were quite a few neat variations that came in over the years. As I said, one of the earliest guns to come in was the Romac 992 in 5.45x39. There would also be the Kerr 2, the Mark II, the WUM 2, and so on. These were interesting because these were the first 5.45x39 Kalashnikov type guns to come into the country. The only ones to come in before were a tiny number, under 100, Chinese type 88Ss, which came in right before the 89 Bushman. So it was really neat to see 5.45 guns. The problem is back then in the late 90s, these started to come in 97, the same with the 7.62x39s. Getting the ammo was problematic. So a lot of times they'd have to sell the gun and then offer a case of ammo with it to make sure people could shoot it. As with the SAR-1, Century kind of unified the product line with the SAR-2 in 1999. And that's what I've got here. This is my SAR-2. This one I've had since 2002. I bought it about a year after getting my SAR-1. The SAR-2s were ban-compliant guns, of course. They were imported from 99 to 2003, just like the SAR-1s. They were really the same gun as the SAR-1, built from all new parts, except in the caliber difference. Now, I've obviously modified this, as I've said in a couple of other videos, to be more like a PA-86, which is Romania's military rifle in 5.45. A lot of people call it an AK-74. It's really not. It's more of an AKM, hence the 45-degree gas block remaining. But you get the idea. When these came in, some of the early guns, such as the Kerr 2, might have original threads with a cover, or just a cover and nothing underneath. But of course the bayonet lug would be machined off. And that was kind of bad because the way this is set up, they would take the whole lug off, not just leave a block like in the back. This means your cleaning rod would walk out on the on all those, the SAR-2s. It would just walk out. Now obviously since the ban sunset, it was perfectly okay to put a original front sight base back on, which would give you the original thread and the bayonet lug. It's worth just pointing out briefly that Romanian guns use 22mm threads, not 24, which is standard for AK-74s, so just be mindful of that. I know right now Atlantic has some very nice Ames 74 builds built from Romanian kits. These came in with standard palm swell handguards. Obviously I put the Ames 74, the PA-86 handguards on. They came in with a fixed buttstock Back then you couldn't have a folder. If people wanted to make a clone, they had to pin or weld the folder open. The earlier imports, again like the Cur 2 or the Romac 2, would have this upswept charging handle. It's also thinner and longer than standard. This was to make sure it could easily clear the folding stock. Get it here, even when folded. But since the guns came in with fixed wood stocks, well actually they came in with thumbhole stocks, but then Century put fixed wood on, Cugir would quit doing the upswept charging handle and just go to a straight out on the SAR-2s. It's interesting though because it still has the longer, thinner profile of the PA-86. Obviously I replaced this one. Otherwise the receivers are pretty well the same. They took double stack magazines. They would ship with one low capacity 5 or 10 round, and back then they would ship with an East German certified pre-band magazine, Bakelite style, which while Romania never made is what these came with, and they worked fine with them. Romania itself would use metal 30 round 5.45 mags, but they had only adopted the rifle in 1986 and it did not go into wide scale production until the late 80s, so I would assume in the late 90s they just didn't have a bunch of mags that they wanted to get rid of and not that many they could certify as pre-band, so they just took the easy route, Century did, and just had a bunch of these East Germans that were left over after the fall of the Berlin Wall. There was a version of this known as the SAR-3, which was identical to the SAR-2 except in 5.56 NATO 223, and they would even come with these same East German mags. The problem was all they did to modify them to fire 223 instead of 5.45 was replace the follower. So the SAR-3s had a pretty dubious reputation. Some guns ran fine, some did not. It was mostly a commercial venture by Cugir to appeal to the American market to give a small diameter, high velocity cartridge, and so they were basically retrofitted PA-86s. Now they would introduce the PM-97 Select Fire military rifle as well, but again that was mostly for commercial sales at the time. So we have the SAR-1, SAR-2, and SAR-3. These would be replaced in 2003 by the WASR-10, as we already looked at, the WASR-2, and the WASR-3. Now this is interesting because whereas Century would go to the GP WASR-10, they would not go to a GP WASR-2 or GP WASR-3. They would keep importing them in pretty small numbers after the ban, but they would never go to the trouble to really deban them. They would still ship them with fixed stocks. They would never weld back the bayonet lug, and they would not thread the barrel. Now some of them came in with muzzle nuts tack welded on, and underneath you could get a surprise on the on the WASR 2s and 3s. You might get no threads at all. You might get half by 28, which is AR-15, or you might get some weird pattern that I forget what it was right now, 13 millimeter, 11 millimeter. It was something kind of odd. The reason is the Romanian 5.45 and 5.56 barrel is a little bit thinner, and of course the 22 mil threads are part of the sight base, not the barrel. So the barrel was never designed to actually have threads on it itself. So they kind of played around with that idea, but Century never took advantage, never cut the weld and unscrewed the nut. So you could do that as a customer, end user, if you wanted. The WASR 2s and WASR 3s were never that successful because they were never post-ban style, band-free I should say, and they had the single stack dimpleless receiver. And most people still preferred the old SAR 2s or Cur 2s or Romac 2s. Century would continue to bring them in, but in 2011 they discontinued them. They quit bringing them in a little before that, and then they announced that they weren't going to be doing anymore. They sold off what inventory remained. They were gone by 2013. So today the Romanian 5.45 guns are gone. As far as I know, they could still order more They just choose not to. They choose to stick to the 7.62. Oh, one thing to point out, after the sunset of the assault weapons ban, and after it didn't matter if a mag was made before 94, they would start shipping them with the correct Romanian mags. The WASR-2 would have the steel 545 mags, and the SAR-3, the WASR-3, would ship with basically a Romanian copy of the German WASR magazine, which was also made of steel. So that's one change that happened after the ban. Well, as we talked about in the first part here, there was also the 1063 built from military parts, and while most 1063s had a fixed stock, not all. There was a pretty substantial run of Romanian underfolder kits built up. This is mine here. I purchased it new in 2009. They've got a 1969 dated kit here that was assembled in Romania. The receiver is the same as a WASR without the dimples. Still has the XY stampings here. We do not have a scope rail because of the folding stock. When these came in, they would usually have the bulged handguards or the straight, but they wouldn't have the dong. I added this when some kits came around that had these reverse dongs, so that's the change I made on this gun. Still have a bayonet lug, threaded muzzle. I put a muzzle nut on this versus the sugar scoop. This has the original Romanian underfolding stock, this is the early version made of machined steel. Later they would go to a tubular stamped steel. I always thought this was a neat gun. These were called the 1063 UF for underfolder. They really probably should have been more correctly called the 1065, since the Romanian underfolder version was called the PM65, but it doesn't really matter. See here. They were pretty expensive for when they came in. At a time when WASRs were around $350, these were at least $450 up to $500. The earlier ones were pretty well mismatched. I would assume the rifle kits they built from were mismatched in service over the years. Later ones like this one that came in, mostly matching. I think there's maybe one or two parts that don't match, but the major parts at least do, so worth noting that there was these. These have not come around in quite some time. I don't know exactly when. I believe Century officially discontinued the WASR 1063 UF in 2013. But they had not been importing them for quite some time, and they haven't brought them over. But it is a neat variant built from original Romanian parts, especially this buttstock, and it's a good gun. This does have the AKS-47 style stock, which means it doesn't have the locking point on the right side. It's just on the left, and it has a more of a downward sweep, and it has this spring-loaded detent in the butt plate. So that's what Romania always used on the PM65. Even though they went to a stamped receiver. Like I said, these guns had their highs and lows. It doesn't help that a lot of them came over during the low point of the post-2008 election panic. But they're still good guns, and today getting quite desirable just for being a factory underfolder. Otherwise, they were pretty much your standard WASR. Now here's a variant that is not well known and was not imported for very long. This is the WASR GP1063KR. This is a short carbine version. Essentially what this is a Draco carbine. The rear receiver and all that is standard WASR, but the front is a Draco, which in military service would have been the PM90 short rifle. This still fires 7.62 by 39, has a 12.5-inch barrel, slightly shortened gas system, less than an inch shorter, but it is shorter gas tube. It takes standard handguards. The rear sight's a little different, calibrated for the shorter barrel. Most noticeably, we have this combination front sight gas block unit, which is hooded, just like a Draco. Short cleaning rod under it. And over in Romania, they would take an extension brake and weld it on to give 16 inches. As I said, this is a standard WASR receiver. They brought these over, well, I should say, they brought them over in one version with the thumbhole stock, of course. All that's the same. Century sold these in two versions. There was a tactical version, which had a Tapco Galil style side folding stock and Galil style polymer ribbed handguards. There was also a classic version that Century sold that had wooden handguards with the vertical grip. This would be one variant that they would sell with the vertical foregrip. And the Romanian wire folding stock, like obviously this one is here. This is the commercial style with the push down lever versus the push button, which is on the SAR-2. But they're both Romanian. They just put these on the AIM. I think the export version they just called the AIMR, the AIMR, and this would be the version on it. For military service, it would probably have the push button if it was Romanian. I took the foregrip off because the Romanian military guns I've come across and heard about all had the bulged handguards. So I took that off. Now these handguards actually came from a 2003 SAR-1. This is the transitional handguards I referred to in the first part. They are laminated oil finished wood with the palm swells. This is what came in between the shellacked handguards and then the raw wood ones. So I kept this. The rifle they came on is long gone, but I had this set. The reason the buttstock died is it split. It actually it had swollen probably sometime during shipping and split. But I saved the handguards from that rifle, which I thought were quite nice. Laminates are neat, and I think they work well on this little carbine. Really like this gun, but the 1063 KR, it was only around for about 6 months. It seems like Century only did one batch. Forgive me if I'm off by a year, guys, but I think it was 2008 these appeared. But with the Draco pistol being around, I think there just wasn't a place for this configuration. Most people would rather have the pistol with the 12-inch barrel and no extension. I thought having the stock, it definitely makes it easier to shoot. So I went with this. This was actually one that Century sold off on an odd lots list as a you fix them. It had some problems, mostly with things being straight. It came in during the low QC point, I suppose, but we got it fixed up, and it runs really well, even if it's not aesthetically the best looking in the world. I have a Hungarian 20 round mag in it. There was a Romanian 20 round that was issued with this gun, but they're very popular in the US and very rare, so I had some. They've all gone to either friends or been sold off. This is the late production style sling. But yeah, I wanted to show the KR. It's been in a few other videos here and there, but it's really an interesting WASR variant that only came around very, very briefly. So final thoughts. I brought back out the most modern production gun here, so that's probably what most of you are looking at now. I did put a different mag in it, and it doesn't have as much front to back play as that first mag, so we'll say that one mag's a little on the loose small end, and that's what I was kind of getting at. When you machine out a mag well, if you don't do it enough, then a lot of mags, especially polymers, won't fit. If you do it too much, people complain. But really, mag wiggle, mag wobble is just how an AK runs. Even my arsenals, even my pre-bands have some, so it's not really something to worry about. I mean, obviously if it's excessive or it's going out a quarter of a turn, then it might be an issue, but there really aren't that many that are that bad. These do have stabilization plates as well. So the WASR today, the WASR in 2017. The world we live in now, AK imports are drying up like no one's business. There just aren't that many on the market. Most of the ones have disappeared. Arsenal is, we don't really know right now. Obviously the Russian guns, both Izhevsk, Izhmash, and Molot are gone. They're gone. They're not coming back probably for a long time, if ever. The Arsenal SLR 107s, 104s are pretty unknown at this point. They can bring more in, but they've been out of stock for a while, and we don't know when more are coming or if. There's still the SAM 7, which is the milled Arsenal series. And there are the NPAPs, which are the Zastava Serbia, also brought in by Century. But even there, it's slimming down. The OPAPs have gone. The M77s, which are the 308s, haven't been around for a while. The M90s, which are the 223s, they only brought over one batch, and they said they're not going to bring over more. The M92 pistols are still coming in, but in small numbers. That's really about it for the Zastavas. As far as the Romanian guns, we looked at some variants. There are still others that came in that I didn't want to include in this video because it'd make it even longer. For example, there was the AES-10, AES-10B, the Draco, the Mini Draco, the Micro Draco, which really all deserve their own thing, but they're all in the same family as the WASR, as are the PSLs to some extent. But all that's gone now. The only guns that Century is still importing are the basic WASR here. They don't do the underfolders, they don't do a side folding version anymore. The Dracos still come in, but in smaller numbers every time, it seems like. The PSLs are long gone. When they bring these in, they're all the same. Sometimes they'll put the US wood on them. Sometimes they'll put Magpul furniture. It seems like whatever they put on them, it's US furniture, not original Romanian stuff, which is disappointing. Because again, they're kind of going for a commercial thing. So while I do not like Century's market decisions, necessarily trying to go more for a commercial market, the reality is the AK has gone to a more commercial market. When I first bought my SAR-1 and then SAR-2, the AK was a niche item for people like me who were into history and just wanted something different. Now though, that's everyone. Everyone's kind of wanting an AK. If they want a modern sporting rifle, known as an assault weapon to liberals that hate guns, they want an AK now. So Century has tried to move more center, get away from more the military collector end, and try to go more to the more commercial modern end. What's nice about the WASR is it's a standard AKM platform. You can still put original furniture on it, original bayonets, original mags in it. Mostly original parts will all fit, except for the full autos, of course. So this is still a good base. And again, the fit and finish is quite nice on these newer ones. Still Parkerized, still Romanian. The biggest issue to me is the higher cost, but even then, there aren't a lot of alternatives. I would still rather have a WASR over pretty much any US-made AK, certainly the ones in the same price range. I've always been kind of a proponent of the WASR. I never was one to jump on the bandwagon saying that these were the bottom of the barrel. You don't have to even take my word or anyone else's. Just go look at old forum posts from, say, 2005 through 2009. WASRs were the one that people liked to crap on. They were kind of considered the lowest common denominator. People complained. But if you really look at the complaints, they were mostly cosmetic, and a lot of them weren't even to do with the WASR. They were to do with just the AK platform in general. AKs aren't meant to be perfect and pretty and completely straight and completely burless. You know, it's an AK. It's a Soviet farm tool that just happens to fire bullets. It was meant to be a tool, not a pretty gun. And that's why I always liked the Romanian guns. It seems like they embodied the spirit that Kalashnikov imbued it with. I still think they're a good gun. As I said, many people have put over 10,000 rounds. I've put over 7 or 8 through my SAR-1. It has never broken a major part. These guns are so simple internally that even if you were to break a part, there's just not... Man, these new ones are stiffer. Hang on a sec. There's just not much to go wrong. There's just not much to worry about breaking. You got your top cover here. It's not going to do much with it. Recoil spring. Bolt group. Your gas piston is fixed to the carrier. One thing I wanted to point out, these pistons should have some play to them. That's normal. That's for tolerances. Where you really get into trouble is when they weld the piston onto the carrier and it's perfectly straight. A true AK gas piston should be screwed on and pinned on with at least a minimum amount of play like this one has here. That just helps it with reliability. So that's not going to break, I mean, to be honest. Your bolt is just as durable as any other bolt. You have an extractor here. That could possibly break, but this takes standard extractors. Have a free-floated firing pin. It's just held in, so there's not a lot to go wrong there. If you were to break your firing pin, it's a standard AKM. In your receiver, really all we have is the fire control group, the FCG. This is a Century Rack 1 double hook trigger group. This takes standard trigger groups, so if one of the, there's only 2 springs in this whole thing. There's the major spring that goes for both the hammer and the trigger. There's a smaller spring for the disconnector. Again, very standard. This is a military grade stamped receiver, properly riveted and heat treated. It's not going to fail you. We have a forged trunnion front and back. That's going to be fine. Barrel's properly pinned in. Cold hammer forged chrome line barrel. If you can afford to buy the ammo to shoot one of these out, you can afford to buy a new gun, to be honest. I bet this is pretty tight, yeah. The gas tube is just a single hollow piece. You're not going to break it. Rear sight, there's really nothing to break, but if you did, it's standard rear sight. Standard is kind of the name of the game with the WASR, and that's what's good. It's a good introduction AK. We talked about some of the other calibers that these came in, but Century has just gone with the 7.62-39 because it is the most popular. They sold more of those than any of the others put together. And it's a good decision. That is the most popular caliber for the AK easily. And if they're just going to do one, it makes sense. And I always recommend that if someone doesn't have an AK and wants one, their first one really should be a WASR or something darn close, because it's just your standard gun. There's just not much to go wrong. It's going to give you a good first impression of the system. It's a lot harder to do on a table than you'd think, guys. It's a lot easier to do in your lap, trust me. Especially when you're not greasy. But, yeah, it's just a good introduction to the AK world, this gun. I wish it came with more modern parts, but, you know, accessories and that kind of thing. But they are what they are. There we go. This tends to flare out a little bit on this side, you see. Again, the internet for a long time loved to hate this gun. Now it loves to love it, and I definitely think it's much more on key with loving the WASR because there's just a lot. The myths and stuff, they're just myths. Part of it is Century never talked much about their production. Cugir never talked much about their production. Heck, there was even a myth back in 2008 that Cugir was going to quit making these because they had joined the EU and NATO and all that, and that was one of their demands, is that they quit making them. Obviously that was not true. I mean, again, this one's dated 2016. There was a little dry spell there, as with any imports, where none were coming in. There was a myth that these were built in USA by Century using receiver flats. Not true. These come over as fully functional guns from Romania, even if they are single stack 10 rounders. There were some guns that Century built using Romanian parts kits called the GP 1975, but these are not WASRs, and they're easy to tell apart. They're on Nodak receivers, I believe. So yeah, just a lot of myths and conjectures about these guns because they're so prevalent. They've been so common for so long. I just thought we would take our crack at the gun today. There's still a lot more to be said, and I'm sure once I look at the video after recording it, I'll think of things that I forgot to say, and I'll mention them in the comments. And if you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them below. As always, we really appreciate you tuning in. If you like the video, please click like. And if you haven't already subscribed and like AKs and that kind of stuff, please subscribe if you can. We're trying to do a lot of AK videos this year and historical guns. That's kind of my bag, and I have had a lot of experience with AKs, having shot them for about 20 years now. I own one for over 15. Well, I guess that's about it for the WASR today. This is Misha, and we'll catch you next time.